welcome to the latest in the GLS series of masterclasses. Today we'll be setting up the groundwork that will enable you to make the most of all our future training sessions and our know-how development sessions and tools. So today's session will hopefully cover an effective legal team goes about managing its know-how assets. Let's jump right into it. What we'll be covering today. The key themes that we're going to be exploring are as follows. What exactly is know-how? What is the role of know-how in the legal department? And we will learn about how that know-how can be managed as part of the know-how management cycle. What does an effective know-how management plan actually look like? We'll then be wrapping up with a quick discussion on some key knowledge management issues that should be kept in mind as you apply the learnings from today's sessions in practice in your own legal departments. So to set the scene, what we're effectively trying to do today is to ensure that you leave the session with a palpable appreciation that knowledge itself is a true asset. And like any other corporate asset, such as cash flow, human resources, raw materials, it can and should be managed effectively to drive the productivity of your legal department and the business that your legal department sits within. What exactly is know-how then? Well, it's perhaps simplest to consider it as an awareness of a fact, an experience, or a skill. Know-how is dynamic in nature and it can evolve, meaning that it can evolve or degrade over time, depending on how you manage it. What effective know-how is the ability to apply that knowledge to a particular context. So for our purposes then, effective legal knowledge is any legal knowledge or know-how resource that allows us to deliver our legal services more effectively within the in-house context. Now, this slide brings up the first point to consider for the wider presentation today. Basically, don't be distracted by all the details that are on the slide. A recording of this video will be published in the GLS Legal Operations Center shortly after the completion of the webinar. So you'll have the opportunity to read through all of the slides in detail at your leisure. But what you can tell instantly from the length of the list on this slide is that know-how is clearly a material contributor to the legal department's performance. Its benefits are enormous. Know-how enables everything from the enhancement of your team's productivity to being a fundamental definition of your team's character and identity. Now, a concept such as identity might seem to be a bit grandiose for something as simple as a set of checklists or templates. But I'm sure you can all appreciate that if you are a lawyer in a legal department or a law firm that has a comprehensive, easy to locate, beautifully designed suite of templates and guidance notes and know-how support, you as an individual start to look like a genius. The business units that you're supporting think of you as the smart, effective problem solver lawyer that they want to work with. By contrast, if you're the kind of lawyer that's in a situation where you're always scrabbling around to look for dodgy freebie templates that were located from Google and take you forever to find because they're not properly indexed, and you often end up using the wrong ones because you're not quite sure which bit of know-how should be used for what job, well, then you start to quickly get the reputation of being the guy who tries hard, but he's slow at his work, and the work product itself is not so great. So yes, it's not unfair to say that your very reputation and identity can be impacted by how your legal department or your business decides on how to manage its know-how. So, why is know-how important? Well, it's a quick, as this quote will summarize, if you don't manage your know-how properly, then you're effectively carrying on the bad old ways. And we all know that the quickest way to disengage employees is to let them neglect their skills, not pay attention to their career and well-being, and then embark on continuous improvement standards and skills will benefit the employees and the organization itself. That is why good legal departments take this topic so seriously. Okay, so some frequent know-how performance issues. When know-how is being managed poorly, it's usually because of some combination of the factors on this slide. For example, a key issue with know-how management is the failure to have a centralized depository of that know-how. So the know-how within the business is inefficiently disaggregated through multiple informal and informal locations. That division or that inaccessibility itself drives division and political infighting within the team. And so your management of know-how not only increases inefficiency, but increases the team dynamics that itself can be very poisonous for the functioning of a legal department. No KPIs, another classic failure of know-how management in bad legal departments. We all know that if something can be measured, it can be improved. And this applies equally to the management of your know-how. Having objectively verifiable KPIs, for example, on contributions to know-how resources that are made by your legal department, automatically incentivizes your team to start improving and developing a culture of excellence within the department and within the know-how management of the department. Another key issue of that leads to poor know-how management is a failure to have executive buy-in. Good know-how within an in-house legal department does not just happen by accident. We're all of us on this call will be motivated to kind of read and do additional studyings in our evenings and our weekends. But we're also equally conscious that our evenings and weekends are very rarely actually free. So what does this mean for a legal department? What it basically means is that if you don't have executive buy-in, like a institutional approval of management of know-how, then know-how becomes a nice to have rather than being as part of your job. And which I'm sure we're all very conscious, when things are nice to have, they very quickly start being abandoned and they don't get maintained as they should do. So executive buy-in is key, and it should be seen as a core role of each employee's jobs within the business. Finally, not socializing know-how to your business. As we mentioned in our description of what know-how actually is, what we're looking for within an in-house legal department is effective know-how, i.e. know-how that can be used on the day-to-day job. So having a large library of extremely long academic articles on legal subjects is nice to have, but it's not very useful to actually get the day-to-day job done quickly and efficiently. Well, it's not necessarily useful to enable that. What you as an in-house legal department should be looking for is know-how that is then being translated into things like checklists for specific items or the updates of your templates within the legal department. It's socialized to enable you to perform the job better. Okay. Now, to introduce what is probably a new concept to many people on this call. the know-how management cycle. What we're looking to do as in-house lawyers that are interested in legal operations or the management of know-how and improvements of the functionality of our legal departments is to move ourselves and our legal department from the phases on the left-hand side of this table through to the phases that are on the right-hand side of the table. Basically, we're looking to mature the legal department's approach to management of know-how and the utilization of know-how. Stage one in this maturity cycle or management model is that the basic concept of knowledge management doesn't even exist. Collaboration on knowledge management is not promoted within the business. An informal system of know-how management exists, but individuals are rewarded for their own tacit knowledge without any incentive to share that knowledge with other team members. This is stage one. This is where, unfortunately, the vast majority of in-house legal departments currently reside. And in summary, this is a very bad place to be. One step up from that stage is instantiation. Effectively, there's a basic understanding of knowledge management, the processes, strategies, and importance of knowledge management, and that understanding is shared amongst the team. There are some systems for knowledge management to allow collaboration and ways of capturing and storing tacit knowledge. By attending this course today, you're taking a very positive step towards at least getting to the initiation phase of the model. Step up from the initiation phase is the value recognition phase. Companies within this phase of maturity value knowledge management across the board. There's a corporate culture that accepts and appreciates knowledge management, and as a result, knowledge management processes and technologies are implemented and regularly updated to serve the specific requirements of the legal department and the business that that legal department resides within. Finally, strategic phase. This is the gold standard. If you're operating in this phase, your business is characterized by knowledge management being collaborative, know-how is stored and then used effectively, and it is knowledge that comes into the legal department is institutionalized so that it is effective for the specific requirements of that business. Know-how is updated regularly, and the practice of knowledge management itself is conscientiously addressed. Further developments of the knowledge management systems are based on clearly understood and logical set of priorities. This all enables the know-how within the department and within the business to be actively leveraged to give that department and that business a competitive advantage. Knowledge itself is now becoming a tool that allows you to succeed in the marketplace. This is where everybody currently is. This is where you'll be by the end of this webinar. And this is where we as proactive leaders within the in-house legal industry should be trying to get our departments and our businesses as quickly as possible. That is, we want to be capturing know-how that flows through the legal department. We want to preserve that know-how. We want to preserve the know-how that we currently have. We want to actively grow our know-how resources at every opportunity. And we want to make the know-how readily available to all members within the legal team. And in this way, we'll be using that know-how in a way that gives us a competitive advantage. Okay. So what does a formal know-how function actually look like? Better still, what does an optimized know-how function within a legal department actually look like? Well, the good news here is that GLS has actually done the hard work for you by developing our legal transformation tube map. This is a visual representation of all of the functions that exist within an optimized in-house legal department. Now, as I'm sure you're quickly observing, there's a huge number of functions within the department and a huge number of resource elements that make up each of those functions. In fact, there's so many that even to share it on this kind of webinar means that it has to be, I have to zoom in to the point of making this as big as a billboard. Fortunately, the tube map is interactive and enable quick functionality and orientation. And today we're going to be looking at specifically the knowledge line, i.e., what are the critical resources that make up this specific functionality within the turmoil and chaos that is the typical legal department. Now, let me get a few more details up for you. Okay. So, in this visual analogy of a legal department and the knowledge function, each square is a subway station. That subway station is an element that makes up that function, okay? Stay with me. Secondly, we're looking at how do we go about improving knowledge management function within your legal department? Well, the first step is having a strategy to optimize the performance of each of these stations that make up that function. So, a natural question that arises, how does one know where to start when you're going about your efforts of transforming this function? Now, there are multiple choices you can make on how you're going to go about doing this transformation task. GLS transformation theory provides that formative stations, in this formative stations are the ones highlighted with the red stars, are the stations that regulate the total possible performance attainable by the function. In essence, how good the whole function operates is directly related to how good each of these specific functions operate. If they're bad, the function as a whole is bad. If they're good, the function as a whole at least has an opportunity to be good. As such, addressing these red stations, formative stations first, may be a logical way to prioritize your efforts when you're going about transforming your legal department. An alternative approach, but certainly not a mutually exclusive approach, is to focus on what we've highlighted with the orange stars. These are what we call the repeater stations, i.e., these are stations that appear on the knowledge line, but they're also stations that appear on multiple other lines simultaneously. Meaning that when you're planning how to maximize the performance of your investments into your transformation, a sensible approach might be to invest in these repeater stations, because by so doing, you're simultaneously improving the performance of other functions within the legal department. You're getting great return on investment for each dollar that you're investing into your transformation initiatives. So, next step is working out how do we go about planning our knowledge management journey. As the saying goes, if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So, what does our plan need so that we can harvest the power of knowledge and know-how management? Well, Planning is easy to say, but it does require effort to do so. An effective knowledge plan emerges, though, when you provide responses to each of these questions. Good quality answers to these questions will deliver you a great knowledge management plan. For the remainder of today's webinar, we'll be effectively going through each of these questions and working out an effective response to them. So let's get going. Who needs the know-how? Well, this first one is a fairly obvious question. The entire legal team needs your know-how. Eventually, the entire business will also need the know-how. However, as step one, start by making sure all of your lawyers within your legal department know and have access to it. And secondly, once that's established, you can then start rolling it out for the rest of your business. Now we've established who needs the know-how, let's work out what know-how do we actually have? What is our current status? Like, where are we starting our journey from? Now, the key thing to remember is that every legal department has at least some know-how. In many cases, know-how is, however, held locally by the individuals within that legal department and is not therefore usable by the team as a whole. So a good way of improving knowledge management within your legal department is starting by grabbing or getting everyone within the legal department to contribute what they currently have into a central indexed pot so we can work out what we have and maximize it. The easiest way to do this is to start with an online audit. A point to note when you're doing such a gathering exercise, we don't just want any know-how. It must be good know-how. And the features of what makes up good know-how will be considered in a couple of slides. But suffice it to say that when you're auditing your existing know-how resources, you should impose strict criteria on what you're actually looking for. While you're auditing what know-how resources you have, don't forget to also audit what know-how infrastructure you actually have. Given the size of your company, infrastructure might mean storage systems, processes, personnel, anything. But like, get a good sense of what are the know-how assets and how are those know-how assets being utilized within the business. Finally, and this is one for anyone on this call who's the actual manager of a legal team. If you want such an audit to be done properly, you must make sure that you also value each team member's efforts on the know-how front. I.e., if your team members are contributing know-how to the benefit of the department, make sure that their efforts are getting recognized and are being truly valued. That way, you're starting to also formulate the culture which encourages know-how development within the department. Okay. So let's start getting into the details. What know-how do we actually need? This is going to be one of the most important parts of the planning process. The audit requires you to ask your legal team exactly what know-how do they need to perform their jobs. How you approach this question in the audit can be tricky. There's a good way to do it, and then there's a bad way to do it. The bad way to do it is asking an open question. A simple, what do you need? That kind of question, however, is very rarely helpful or efficient. Effectively, you just get a laundry list of anything that anyone can think about, rather than a list of the things that are truly needed. The good news about going through this question, though, is that it's not a complicated task. And the reason it's not complicated is that 80% of 80% of the legal departments out there all have the same know-how requirements. And as a result, you can start with a very well-established footprints in the sand view of the know-how requirements that your specific department will need. What this means in practice for your audit is that the good way to ask an audit question is as a in addition to the following basis, i.e., your audit will frame the question around an established menu of anticipated resource requirements. You will then ask your team to say, in addition to these specific items, are there any specific additional points of know-how that you need, for example, to address practice areas or address locations or sectors, etc. So you've got the 80% sorted, and then you're getting your team to fine tune the final 20%. In so doing, you're efficiently creating both an effective baseline of resources for your team to use, and you're properly covering the specialist coverage areas that which define the bespoke needs of your actual business. Okay. So how are we going to go about getting this? We've established what we need, and we've established, well, we need to address the how do we go about getting it? Like, well, how do we physically go about getting this know-how into the right place at the right time? Starting with, it's probably worth noting that there's an almost unlimited source of know-how capture. So many sources of know-how capture that we can't even cover them all here on this webinar. But the first source is what we've just covered. What does your team currently have hidden on their local drives and in their pockets? Like, let's get what we actually have out of the locals and harmonize it for the whole group. The second source is what we at GLS consider to be the very best source of know-how. It's the stuff you then create yourself. This stuff falls into two categories. Stuff that you harvest from each transaction or each project that your team works on, and the know-how that you produce together as a team, i.e. through, well, for example, through brainstorming sessions or asking someone to do specific research notes. The final source is the most famous, but has surprisingly limited role in good knowledge management within an in-house legal department. That is know-how that you can bring in from external providers. Now, you can buy or license know-how from plenty of sources like Westlaw or PLC, even Wikipedia. However, the problem with this kind of know-how gathering is that you're paying for the entire database of know-how that service provider is offering, even though far more than 90% of that database is never going to actually be used by your department. It's the gym membership phenomenon. When you go and join a franchise gym, you pay a fee that gives you access to all of the gyms in the network. In reality, most members of that gym spend most of their time only ever attending a single location. So the point here is be careful about incurring large fees for external service providers unless you're very sure that your team will genuinely use the resources that provided to them. Otherwise, you may end up just effectively donating your limited reserves of cash to PLC. Okay, next external provider, law firms. law firms are very good providers of know-how for certain things. All law firms will, all major law firms currently send out newsletters and updates and etc. In fact, I'm sure you've all received many such letters from GLS. These are helpful. In particular, they're helpful for what we call legal horizon monitoring. I have a number of your law firms send you their know-how so that you know whenever a new law, regulation, or court case changes the parameters of the business that you're working within. Okay. Another source of third-party know-how are professional associations. These should be better than they typically are, if I'm honest. They do have some know-how resources, but actually the reality is that professional associations have more limited know-how resources than I expected growing up. Worth keeping an eye on them though, and typically very low cost resources, so worth using, but they have a limited scope. Finally, there's tapping your collegiate network. Always surprisingly effective to see what know-how resources old friends and acquaintances have available to them. And then you can attend programs like this given by GLS. And I hope you've all downloaded our entire agenda for 2024's training sessions. And of course, there's Google, which will give you a myriad of training resources if you use it. Okay, so now we've got some sources for this know-how. Let's look at knowledge capture. How are we going to get it into the department itself? Whilst there are so many knowledge capture sources, we're going to just focus on two big ones. We're focusing on these particular ones because you can deploy this within your team immediately, and there's no, without having to pay for any licensing fees beyond the cost of a bit of time. Firstly, deal harvesting. You need to capture the memory that and know-how that arises as a result of every transaction that your legal department works on. We need to harvest from those deals. What are the deals we are working on? What is the know-how that enables those deals to happen? Do we need to update on templates in any particular way? Has something gone wrong? Or by contrast, has something gone particularly right? If so, let's address those things. Are there opportunities to standardize our documentation to make future deals more efficient? Is there an opportunity here to create a checklist of issues so that we can train junior resources more efficiently and remind senior resources of things that they've come across but then forgotten? Is there an opportunity to create guidance notes from the deal? This kind of know-how can be captured on every single transaction that your legal department works on. You don't need to capture all of it on every deal. If you capture even a small amount of this from every deal, by the end of the year, you'd be stunned at how much additional know-how resources are within the legal department and readily available and immediately applicable to the exact work that you're actually doing. Second version of this is just getting your team to sit down and do a brainstorming session. Let's use the collective knowledge of the team to work out how best to deal with real issues. And start by just having a complete data dump of ideas. Look for the widest possible inclusion of know-how and information. Let's just throw it all into the mix and start prodding it and poking it and working out as a collective how we can use that knowledge to create an effective tool for that team to do their job. This is a seriously qualitative method of introducing know-how into your team. It triggers different parts of each team member's brain, so it makes them feel like they're very much engaged in the culture of know-how development within the department, and that means that they're locked into, uh, they're aligned with the future improvements of that department. Effectively, the collective wisdom of your team is here. By using these methods, you're making the collective wisdom of your team available not only to the entire team at that particular moment, but every future team that exists within the company. Moreover, this is not just random points of information or random data. It's data and know-how that is socialized with your business's specific group legal policy, i.e., it's effective know-how that can be used to improve the outcomes of the matters that you work on. Okay. So we've now got our big pot of know-how, resources, and assets. Now what? Well, a problem that many legal departments have, and I'm sure we've all seen some variation of this in our careers, is that at best, the know-how materials within the legal department are just stored in a gigantic folder where metadata labeling is rarely used, indexing is rarely updated. So whilst the know-how is technically in the building, it's functionally inaccessible to the legal team. So in effect has no impact on their ability to perform the day-to-day jobs. Now, the simplest way to take a big step forward from that typical position and without having to spend any money on external resources or consultants at all is to simply start organizing your know-how resources around some clear, intuitive to understand containers. Now, everyone will have their own particular view on what particular containers to use. However, the containers that are visible on this slide are what we at GLS would consider to be the essential containers, the minimal building blocks for a clear knowledge session and knowledge management system. In addition to these containers, you can, of course, add bespoke containers for your particular sector or for your particular business unit or for your particular geography. The point here is that you don't need to map out every single container that you need on day one, but start with the essentials and then build on that structure as you and your team acquire more know-how and acquire more experience of how that know-how can be used most effectively within your department. The key points to remember when you're starting to organize your know-how management is that it needs to, one, be easy to access, two, it needs to be easy to use, and if possible, and frankly, this is effort that is rewarded with huge amounts of productivity outcomes, make sure that is well indexed and intuitive to find. If you fail to comply with those kind of three principles, what you ultimately end up with is something like a wallet that's full of money, that's bolted shut so that you can never get it and use that money. Okay. So let's go from the theoretical and abstract to the practical. Knowledge management tools. As I'm sure you're familiar with GLS's approach to technology, we believe that technology has a key part to key role to play with knowledge management. However, technology itself is not a silver bullet that's going to do the job for you and make all problems disappear. So, for the purposes of today's webinar, we want to give you some basic education on this area of knowledge management systems and knowledge management tools. There are effectively two types of knowledge tools. Tools that are used for creation and tools that are used for sharing. Creation tools facilitate the authoring, annotation, creation of templates, and data mining. So this 1 second. Beg your pardon. Sharing tools, by contrast, are tools that facilitate collaboration and dissemination of the know-how within the legal department. Having a view to these two broad categories does make it a bit easier when you're then confronted with a huge array of knowledge tools that are available on the market. As a quick overview, these are some of the more famous and most widely distributed knowledge tools in the market today. There's frankly a huge number of knowledge management systems out there. However, probably the most valuable advice I can give you today is that the vast majority of in-house legal teams are a long way away from needing any of those expensive systems, which is good because most in-house legal teams can't afford to use them either. So what you can do, however, is as a starting point, just start with a simple use of Microsoft SharePoint. We GLS are not distributors of Microsoft SharePoint, but we're just saying it as a practical piece of advice. It is a very powerful tool, very intuitive, very easy to use. So if you have Microsoft 365 within your business, your legal department can start rolling out the know-how management functionality of it without incurring any additional expense, meaning that you've got an opportunity here to actually do something without having to get sign-off from your COO or CFO. This is an initiative that you can take on with and get done without having to beg for more budget. Always very important with the transformation efforts of an in-house legal department. Okay. So we've moved away through our systems, and we're getting to what is a good knowledge management system, what is a bad knowledge management system for your, and by system I mean kind of your processes within the department, not the specific tool itself. The problem we're trying to address with know-how management is that know-how is an area that operates like a gremlin. It's very, very easy for know-how to suddenly start getting multiplied by a simple press of a few keystrokes. You start with one piece of know-how and then suddenly it's populating like gremlins and you lose control of your assets very quickly. So a good knowledge management system is one where strict practices are implemented to ensure that you avoid building a haystack of know-how where that results in you being impossible to find any one particular piece of know-how within that haystack. So make sure that you have clear rules for how your team should contribute know-how. You want to keep your know-how to a bare minimum of content. This is a lean, mean approach to knowledge management. The know-how that is used should be in a form that is applicable to your day-to-day job. This is not just primary data. We don't just want a know-how management system that has a copy of a piece of case law, like the judgment from a case. What we want is that judgment to be turned into a checklist so that checklist could then be applied to the next deal that your team is working on. You want your know-how to be well indexed, so it's quick and easy to find the piece of know-how that you actually need for the job. Ideally, it's organized in such a way that's intuitive so that somebody doesn't have to memorize how to use the system. You want to make sure that the know-how that's within your system is aligned with your group legal policy and reinforces your group legal policy where possible. And finally, a culture element. To have a good knowledge management system within a legal department, you need to facilitate or encourage the growth of a culture of good know-how management within your team. This is very rarely something that can be imposed upon people. You need everyone within the team contributing to and reinforcing these principles of know-how management. So, within that context, what are the best forms of know-how that we can have access to as an in-house legal department? These first five are what GLS consider to be the gold standard of know-how resources, meaning that they are easy to produce, they have a low cost, and they deliver a very powerful outcome. Checklists, templates, guidance notes, playbooks, and a brainstorming session as a tool to collect know-how. These are the these are the invaluable items within a legal department. These are so much more valuable by themselves than access to PLC. Get these right, and you'll be a long way down the road to having an effective know-how system within your business. Okay, so we've got our knowledge management system up and running. Great job, right? Like we've got some know-how, it's organized well into a system. We can move on to the next project. Well, yes and no. The issue is that know-how is like a garden, i.e., how well you tend that garden will determine the ongoing value of that know-how to your business. This is something that needs to have continual care and improvement, and it's going to evolve over time. So with that in mind, I want to flag the top 5 recurring issues that you will face through your journey of managing know-how. And then we're going to deal with how to address each of them so that you can avoid a situation where your know-how within your business is degraded over time. Yeah. Firstly, you want to have a clearly understood approval system and kind of standard for know-how within the business. Good to have uh, open brainstorming sessions where everybody contributes and there's no bad ideas. However, that doesn't mean that all know-how is just dumped into your know-how system at the end. The point of those brainstorming sessions is to get the view of everything that is available, and then from everything, you select the bits that are actually usable, and you keep those bits in your system. So your entire team needs to know what is the process and the rules for inclusion of know-how into your system. Again, I've repeated it a few times now, but really indexing your know-how so that it's quick and easy to find and retrieve is critical. Like I say, your know-how is a living, breathing, evolving creature. So you need to maintain it and have a well understood process for that maintenance. I once or twice a year, a specific person or team need to be able to go through, trim out the old dead bits, add new good bits, just check that it's all working. Okay. Ideally, you would like your know-how to be standardized. Um, this is a bit tougher to do and requires the investment of upfront time and effort to make sure that all of the know-how resources are put into the same standardized templates. However, the benefit of doing so means that it's much easier to then leverage that know-how in your day-to-day job. You're making the know-how more effective know-how, and it makes it quicker and easier to search through if everything is in the same format. So then people who are looking for a particular item of know-how don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, every new piece of know-how they're looking at. Okay. And finally, as a summary of all of the points above, organization. Make sure that your knowledge is organized and ensure that it doesn't evolve outside of your control and mutate over time. So, whose job is it to do all of this? It's like there's a lot of roles that I'm sure you started imagining during the course of this webinar. But yeah, whose responsibility is it within a legal department to be achieving all of these best practices? Well, the simple answer is that you all are. Remember, it's a culture of know-how, and you can't have a culture of one. That being said, it is off if you've got the resources, and you can have a dedicated know-how professional or know-how team or somebody who has know-how management as part of their scope of work. That does add a lot of a lot of value and make a lot of things a lot easier. But if you're a team that is too small, or if your team is too small, or you don't have enough resources to have a dedicated professional, make sure that the lawyers within your department are contributing and helping with the management of that know-how. Your service providers, when you engage them, know that know-how is something that you value and that you expect them to contribute it to your legal department as part of their performance. If you have a legal ops team, often they can be assigned a mission to find knowledge assets and help with the general management of your resources. And there's the strategic law firms who can give you advice on specific things. So, with that, let's move on to some conclusions. What we've covered today is the very meta question of what exactly is know-how, particularly in the context of an in-house legal department. What is the role of know-how within a legal department? We've given you a brief introduction to the know-how management cycle and given you some tips and pointers on how you can formulate an effective know-how management plan for yourself. 3 points that I'd like you to remember when you leave today's seminar is that know-how is a strategic resource that needs to be maintained like your garden so that it provides continual benefit to you over time and flourishes. You can easily generate and harvest know-how that suits you. This is not an area of the legal industry where you need to incur massive costs or go about introducing complex technologies to your systems. This is an area that you can improve just through a simple application of effort and intention. And finally, we do ask that you actually apply these practices in context. And with that, we'll guarantee you that you get some massive and massively positive results if you do. So on that note, I will throw it over to Q&A for a couple of minutes. If anybody does have any questions, please feel free to send them through. I'll try and answer them quickly. Okay. No questions from the floor as far as I'm aware. Well, fantastic. I must have answered everything with my initial presentation then. So with that, thank you very much and best of luck with your own efforts. Goodbye.
Thanks, Nicholas. Thank you, Ron.